How big is the US housing bubble? A viewer recently commented, "If you don't buy a house and I don't buy a house, then we'll see just how big the bubble is." While that sounds a bit extreme, the numbers are telling. Right now, there are 510,000 more people selling their homes than there are people looking to buy. Housing inventory in 80 major cities has already surpassed 2019 levels. Some viewers on the East Coast are suggesting that with the September interest rate cut, October is the time to buy. However, viewers in California feel that prices are still nowhere near low enough. So let's take a look at which cities have seen their inventory blow past 2019 levels. Could their home prices be due for another drop? We'll also cover this month's housing price trends across the country and answer your questions. With natural disasters becoming more frequent and insurance rates soaring, how can homebuyers protect themselves? And what bizarre tenant issues are small landlords in California facing, and what can they do about it? Before we start, thank you for liking the video. Your support is my greatest motivation. To understand how much of the US housing bubble has been squeezed out, the most direct signal is to see how many more cities are joining the ranks of those with surging inventory. Take a look at this chart. Starting from January 2025, out of 200 core US cities, 41 had seen their inventory return to 2019 levels. By February, it was 44, then 58 in March, 69 in April, and 75 in May. But here's the important part. The number only crept up to 78 in June, 79 in July, and 80 in August. Do you see the trend? The curve started to flatten in June. The surge isn't as fast and furious as it was before. This doesn't mean the bubble has been completely squeezed out, but the pace is clearly slowing. There are many factors at play, but one key piece of data we're seeing from the front lines of development is that the number of new housing permits being issued to builders is in a steep decline. This means developers are intentionally reducing the supply of new homes in an attempt to prevent the bubble from bursting all at once. Of course, most regular home buyers are still hoping for more of the bubble to be squeezed out to bring prices down further. So let's look at the cities where inventory has surpassed 2019 levels. We can exclude two major regions right away, the Northeast and the areas around the Great Lakes. As we've discussed before, these regions have a chronic housing shortage. But outside of those areas, from Florida to California, inventory is blooming everywhere. Which cities have the greatest potential for a price correction? Why do home prices rise? Many people think it's all about appreciation, but a key component of that is inflation. As long as there's inflation, the price of everything goes up, and houses are just along for the ride. So, to really bring prices down, it might take exactly what that viewer said, a widespread buyer strike. If market demand collapses and a flood of properties hits the market, only then is it possible for prices to see a sustained significant drop. The point is, just returning to 2019 inventory levels might not be enough. We might need to see a corrective overshoot, with inventory potentially doubling for prices to really come down. You can use this inventory heat map to see if your local area has the conditions for such an overshoot. The darker the color, the more severe the inventory surplus is. The highest has already surpassed 2019 levels by 93%. In contrast, the lighter colors indicate that inventory has just barely returned to 2019 levels. Let's go region by region. In the Southeast, while inventory in the North Carolina Triangle is rising, it's nothing compared to Florida. And even within Florida, there are big differences. Miami, for example, isn't even on the list. But if you compare Florida's east and west coasts, the west coast has far more cities with falling prices and greater downward pressure. A viewer asked about investing in Myrtle Beach, a coastal city in South Carolina. The data tells us that a lot of people bought in during the last boom, so a lot of people are selling now. If it's for your own use, that's one thing. But for an investment, you need to find out the percentage of investment properties in the area. If it's over 30%, you should be very careful. Next, let's look at Texas. The bubble is still being squeezed from Dallas to Austin. A major market signal is that Toll Brothers, a leading U.S. homebuilder, just sold off its entire multifamily housing division to focus exclusively on single-family homes. They are shedding what they see as baggage, and in their view, multifamily housing is no longer profitable. So if you're in Texas, you should probably prioritize single-family homes. When you see a major player dumping an entire business line and other people are rushing in to pick up a bargain, you need to think very carefully about the consequences. As a viewer in our city-focused series commented, it's like trying to find gold in a pile of trash. To sum up, the Southeast and South remain the areas with the most pressure from surging inventory. But does that mean the West Coast and California are in the clear? For California, we have to admit that rising inventory is a fact, and it's having a big impact on the local market. However, the impact is greater in Northern California than in Southern California. The inventory surplus in the north stretches from the coastal Bay Area all the way inland. In the south, it's mainly concentrated in Riverside, which we've analyzed before. In inland cities like Sacramento and Riverside, both the number of investment properties and rental prices are in decline, or at least stagnating. But does that mean prices will drop back to pre-2019 levels? To answer that, we have to look at another set of data. How much did prices rise before they started to fall? This chart compares last year's price gains with this year's declines for major California cities. Let's take San Francisco. Last year, prices rose by 2.4%. This year, they've fallen by 3.9%. Over the 2 years, that's a net drop of 1.5%. Sacramento saw a 1.9% gain last year and a 2.4% drop this year for a net drop of 0.5%. But look at the other cities. In Silicon Valley, prices dropped 2.1% this year, but they rose by 9.1% last year for a net gain of 7%. In LA, a 1.3% drop this year was offset by a 5.7% gain last year for a net gain of 4.4%. San Diego saw a 3.4% net gain, and Riverside saw a 2% net gain. So now you can understand why so many California viewers are saying the bubble hasn't popped enough. It's not even close. In contrast, if you look at the Rust Belt cities like Detroit, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland, they've seen 2 consecutive years of price gains. Their market is much easier to read. Next, let's go through the core cities from east to west and answer some of your questions. The U.S. median home price this month is $392,000, up from $384,000 this time last year. A viewer from New Jersey asked, is it safe to buy a house by the river considering the risk of flooding? For anyone buying near a river, like the Hudson, you need to check the FEMA flood maps. Areas designated as Zone AE or VE are high-risk flood zones. Zone X is a lower-risk area. When you're buying a home, try to avoid the high-risk zones. Legally, the seller must provide you with a flood disclosure statement, which includes any history of flood claims. With this information, you can get quotes for flood insurance and find out your deductible. It's crucial to do this homework. We in the construction industry have to take climate change seriously, and so should you. A viewer from the Research Triangle in North Carolina who works at a university asked for advice for their child who is now working and wants to buy a house. My advice is that you should only buy a house when you have a real need for it. That need will give you the motivation to do your research. Right now, in the second half of the year, the market is slower, so you'll have less competition than you would have in the spring. More importantly, I was very impressed by a comment from a viewer in Connecticut who said they wanted their child to buy a house to learn responsibility. That's a great mindset. The goal isn't to get rich quick, it's to learn about real estate. You can start by learning to budget, keeping your mortgage payment below 30 to 35% of your monthly income. Now for Florida. A couple with no kids is planning to move to Tampa next year and wants to know if they should rent or buy. My conclusion is to rent first for at least a year. Get to know the city. Experience a full 12-month cycle, including the rainy season and hurricane season. Figure out which neighborhood you like before you even think about buying. When you're ready to buy, you need to do a risk assessment, focusing on the building's condition and the flood zone. And remember, Florida's home insurance is among the top 3 most expensive in the nation. It will likely be even more expensive next year. Next up is the Midwest. A viewer wants to invest in renovating old houses in the region. My advice is to be prepared to pay your tuition on your first 3 to 5 properties. On paper, flipping houses in a place like Pittsburgh looks incredibly profitable. Buy for $100,000, sell for $200,000 after renovations. But that's for the outsiders. The real profit margin, after accounting for all the hidden costs, is much lower. And that's if everything goes right. For your first few projects, you'll be lucky to make a 5% profit. You'll face delays in materials, labor issues. I've heard stories of contractors having to bail their workers out of jail, and inspection holdups. Unlike Texas, where the government wants you to build, the Midwest can be much tougher. Now for Texas. A viewer in Houston is considering buying a rental property, but is worried that the rent won't cover the mortgage, taxes, and insurance. But they also feel like if they don't do something with their cash, they'll just spend it. I would reframe the question. This isn't about buying a rental property, it's about solving an itchy hands problem. A financial plan is a system, not a single decision. You need a foundation of safe investments like high-yield savings accounts or treasury bills and a diversified portfolio of index funds. A house is just one component of that system. In Texas, with its high property taxes and insurance costs, it's very difficult to make a profit on a rental property right now. You could end up subsidizing the government's public housing. Finally, the West. A viewer who is starting a small business is trying to decide between Seattle, Austin, and LA. My recommendation is Austin for several reasons. First, taxes. Texas and Washington have no state income tax, which is a huge advantage. Austin's business taxes are also more favorable for startups, and its sales tax is lower than in Seattle or LA. And second, the cost of living. Austin's rent prices are currently falling. For a small online business, the tax advantages are a no-brainer. For a brick-and-mortar business, the low rent allows you to test your concept with a small minimum viable product before expanding. Now for our question from a small landlord in California. They rented their first property to a South Asian couple. When the tenants moved out, they found deep scratches on the wood floors and that the brand new stove was half scorched and unusable. The tenants are refusing to pay for the damages. What should they do? First of all, I admire your calm demeanor. Here's a 3-step process for any landlord in this situation. First, review the lease agreement. Make sure it has clauses that cover damages beyond normal wear and tear. Second, document everything. Take photos and videos of the damage with a ruler for scale. Get professional quotes for the repairs. Then, present the tenant with a formal demand for payment, offering a couple of settlement options. And third, if they still refuse to pay, file a claim in small claims court. Often, the threat of having a legal record is enough to make them settle. I welcome all of you to share your own stories of bizarre tenants or landlords. We can all learn from each other's experiences. Thank you for your likes and subscriptions, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next exciting share.